Good morning. Have a bit of an Oscar hangover. um, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Brian Cook, Dr. Brian Cook, and Susie Pellerin. And I'll just read a little bit because your eyes are blurry. It's hard to see. Um, Dr. Cook is a researcher at Toronto Public Health, and he currently has a focus on food issues. In 2008, his work on marketing towards children led Toronto Board of Health to unanimously vote for a call for a ban of children's marketing. He has also done some research on marketing towards children for the Public Health Agency of Canada and is involved in an international research project on children's advertising across 12 countries. He's currently also the lead researcher and writer for the Toronto Food Strategy. So Brian, if you could sort of slowly make your way up here, that'd be great.
All right, good morning, everyone. And get myself going here. So you're going to hear a lot of specific presentations today, I think, about some specific aspects of the issue of marketing to children. What I want to do this morning is kind of give an overview of some of the things that I think often are not talked about, especially where all this advertising came from, where the advertising to children came from, and kind of a sampling of the discussion that's happening today about what should be done about it. Before I do that, just to clarify a couple of terms that you're going to hear a lot today, which is marketing and advertising. So in everyday speech, you're going to often hear these used interchangeably, and that's not such a bad thing. But if you want to use them more technically, marketing is understood to be a much broader array of activities. So American Marketing Association talks about it as the overall strategy and function of promoting a product or service. And within that, you have several activities, including advertising, which is a promotional aspect of marketing. And in Canada, the other thing to note is that advertising is a legal term. Marketing is not defined in legislation, but advertising is. It's defined in the Food and Drugs Act and in other pieces of legislation. So what we know about advertising to children is that it is certainly everywhere today. The IOM says that it's greater intensity and frequency of marketing to children than ever before. We've got beyond TV ads, we've got internet, we've got all kinds of advert games, we've got contests. We have some school advertising in some jurisdictions, as well as all kinds of other things. Dora the Explorer training, toilet seat, and all kinds of other things related to not just food, but for example, toys and girls' clothes and those, so on and so on. So we know it's everywhere, but I just want to give a bit of a brief overview in the first half of my presentation about where this all came from. So looking at a brief history of persuasion, going back, way back, we know that advertising has been around forever. So here's a vase from 500 BC in Egypt. Buy me and you'll get a good bargain. So whenever there's been products available to buy, there's been advertising. A lot of technological developments, of course, after that, invention of the printing press and so on. So there was a bit more advertising in newspapers and so on. Kind of the next key event that happened was the Industrial Revolution, where all the urbanization and growth of production of consumer goods. So people went from household self-sufficiency to some extent, dependency on the marketplace for the products they needed. So advertising was able to turn these plain products into branded social symbols and kind of the start of the more modern advertising environment that we have today. Then in World War I, there was very much a mobilization of media in support of the war, spearheaded by Woodrow Wilson's Committee on Public Information, which was very successful in winning people over to the war effort. And some people were thinking that perhaps we could use these techniques in peacetime as well. A key figure there was a gentleman named Edward Bernays, who was one of the founders of using psychological techniques to be able to advance the area of public relations and be able to shift public opinion. And he was thinking as well that perhaps these kind of media influences could be used in peacetime as well. Now, I also have to acknowledge that there was a very prevalent attitude within, especially the elite back in those days, an understanding or a belief that humans were at their core very animalistic and irrational, and that perhaps democracy couldn't be entrusted to people. They might not vote for the right people, so you needed to have a hand to guide them. So Edward Bernays talked about in his book, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important part of a democratic society. So this idea that the viewing of the public as kind of irrational, then they needed to be controlled. And there were several thinkers, of course, who promoted this idea, not least of which was Sigmund Freud. And Bernays was influenced by him not because he was only very popular, but he also happened to be Edward's uncle. So, an interesting little twist there. So, there's understanding that consumerism and promoting products and using media to promote products was very good for democracy. It was a way to channel people's desires so that it would not lead to any chaos and destruction. But it was, of course, also very good for business in the sense that, given that the Industrial Revolution was unfolding, there was a lot more production capacity in the US. There was a quote back in the days that for everyone to be able to have enough that they needed, factories in the US only had to be open 2 days a week. So there was a need for increase in people to purchase products and their need to match the demand with production. So there's one businessman who talked about shifting America from a needs to a desire culture. So they have to increase the demand for products. It may sound very cynical these days, but there was also the very real concern that with all the production capacity, that there could be in a very stable economy without growth, there could be a lots of unemployment if we weren't able to get people to buy more of the products being churned out by the factories. So advertising was a key to boosting that demand. Here's another business review quote looking at saying that the future of business lay in its ability to manufacture consumers as well as products, and advertising could be key way to increase demand for various products. So marketers then began to use various forms of psychological techniques to study desires, to understand what people wanted and how they could craft their marketing approaches using focus groups and those kind of things. When they did that, they eventually found that another very important revelation was that appealing to emotions and not just logic would make advertising much more effective. So tying products and brands to emotional experiences would be more effective, and it also is much better for corporations and for businesses. If you're only having people loyal to you based on the quality and price of your product, it's very easy for someone else to undercut you, and then there go all your customers. But if you have people connected to your brand through an emotional experience, that makes it a much more stable consumer base. So we can look at some examples. So here's an Adidas shoe ad from 40 years ago. You can see how they have even a little diagram here that shows the quality of the shoe and the various aspects of the shoe. So it's convincing people of the quality of the shoe and why they should logically purchase this. So that's how Adidas sold shoes back then. This is how Adidas sells shoes now. As you can see, no shoes, no mention of a product, the quality of the product, how much the product is, or where to buy the product. That doesn't matter. This is an Adidas campaign from the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Coca-Cola, similarly, 100 years ago. All about the quality of it, what you do with it, how much it is. Interesting that you'll probably never see a Coke or Pepsi national campaign these days that ever mentions the price of the product. So here's Coke today. Again, no real mention of the quality of the product, where you buy it, anything about it, just happiness, health, and these images and emotional connotations. Another interesting thing about the emotional advertising is that some research then showed that you may not even need to pay attention to these ads for it to be effective. So often we think that, well, I didn't really notice that ad on TV, so I'm immune to it, it doesn't matter. Well, actually, some research is showing that this kind of low involvement processing actually could make some of these ads even more effective because they're kind of surpassing your objective rational mind and kind of hitting your limbic mind. So not that we are totally vulnerable to all advertising, but it's the idea that the influences that advertising has on us is a mix of conscious and non-conscious influences. So that's my broad sweep of history of advertising. And then we look at children's advertising specifically. So the 1970s to 90s is when advertisers really started to realize that the child demographic was a really important market on their own. One of the important things is they realized that this new generation of kids, the children of the baby boomers, was different from previous generations. So the new generation of children, they were more empowered, they were more independent, they were more involved in family decisions, including purchasing. There are also a lot more of them than before. And they also had key characteristics that are really important for business. So they're explorers, they're risk takers, they like to show their own identity. And building brand loyalty early on has been also very important as well with this young age group. So here's a brochure from a Kid Power conference a few years ago. Kid Power conference is an annual conference held in Florida, one of the biggest in the world. And here in the invitation for that conference, they talk about how a lifetime consumer can be worth $100,000. And that's why building brand loyalty is critical. marketing to kids is the best way to do so. It goes on to talk about how cradle to grave strategies are really important. So here's an interesting local example of building brand loyalty early on. Here's the Kids Comfort Kit program. This ran until a couple of years ago. So in the course of the program, every OPP cruiser in the province had this teddy bear in its trunk. And as part of the program, they would give the teddy bear to young children that they encountered in the line of duty. I think about 3,000 children received this in the course of the program. And you can see here we have the McDonald's logo on the bottom. And then here we have a McDonald's Happy Meal coupon here. So again, it's a way to comfort children, a very good idea, but also you can see it as a way to communicate to children very on and have this brand experience. And it may be troubling as well that they're trying to communicate to traumatized children they might encounter. And when I say traumatized, I'm not kind of making that up. I'm actually quoting from the memorandum of understanding between OPP and McDonald's, where it talked about that the point of the program is to use these in dealing with a traumatic or hysterical child. So again, an example of building brand loyalty early on. But beyond that, even the more important reason to target children with advertising is this idea of kidfluence. Kidfluence, pester power, the nag factor, the idea that by communicating to children, you're able to communicate to adults as well. So here's a YTV, a stat from a few years ago that shows that Canadian children between 9 and 14 years old influence $20 billion of household purchases annually. And again, that's only 9 to 14-year-olds. And if you're wondering what $20 billion is, that's the combined wealth of the world's 28 poorest nations. So it's a fair amount of money. There are other figures in the US that put it in the US as 700 billion. So it's this idea is using children as a vehicle to reach parents, that kid advertising is word of mouth advertising, which reaches parents, which encourages them to buy the products, not just with children, perhaps they can be other products that are intended for the family as well. Here's another slide from this same presentation. It talks about the way to a man's heart is through a cheeseburger, apparently. Not at all insulting to one of the few males in this room. The way to a woman's heart is through her children. So that not just that adult-child relationship, but that mother-child relationship is particularly important. And some have written about the mom-child relationship being called this so-called the new super consumer. And they even in this particular book give it a nice little animation. This figure is meant to be the four-eyed, four-legged super consumer, which I think is a very different perception and conception that we in public health might have about that relationship. And this particular book talks about in North America, the super consumer being responsible for $1 trillion in annual consumer spending. So a very big market. And if you're just thinking this is only a US thing, here's an ad from treehousetv.com. Treehouse TV is one of the biggest and most popular children's TV networks in Canada. They too are reporting or promoting this super consumer as being a key demographic that advertisers can reach through Treehouse TV. So we often talk about evidence-based decision-making. Researchers certainly are using evidence to inform their marketing strategies. Here's from another children's marketing conference presentation where they document the day in the life of a young 9-year-old Ashley and all the different ways that she interacts with brands throughout the day, noting at the end that there are all kinds of product and training or branding opportunities available to be able to communicate with these so-called tweens throughout the day. So there's all kinds of research going on here. And here's from another marketing presentation talking about how to leverage kid influence in parent purchasing decisions. So lots of research going on here. Another key point I want to bring up here is that advertising targeted to children is different from other advertising that children might see. So sometimes when people talk about wanting to limit advertising to children, critics talk about that you can't put a bubble around children, you can't limit them from not seeing any advertising. But really we're talking about limiting the specific type of child-targeted advertising, which is a very different animal from other environmental ads that children might see. So here's an example from the Fruit Loops website. You'll see a lot of the characteristics there on the left that are very common to children's advertising, the specific techniques that are used in terms of cartoon characters and funny voices, animation, music. This particular one is a website where children then can become engrossed in advert games that are branded, which is very good for marketers because there are so many ways that children and adults can avoid TV advertising these days, but if you can direct them to the website, they can become immersed here in this Fruit Loops game for up to 30 minutes or more on end. Looking briefly at children's ability to understand advertising, you may have heard about this kind of research. This is kind of based on the older research that used the ages and stages information about child processing of information. So it was the understanding that by the age of 4, children can generally understand or tell whether a TV ad is a TV ad versus the content. Around about the age of 8, children generally can understand the persuasive intent of advertising, but it takes until the age of about 10, 12, or later for children to be able to use that information about how to interpret ads in the moment that they're actually being exposed to an ad. But some newer thinking about this is a bit different here. So the idea of this information processing model, children's understanding, said that there would be an age at which children have developed sufficient abilities to defend themselves against advertising influences, much as adults do. But we all know that we, as adults, everyone is still vulnerable to advertising. Otherwise, all this money wouldn't be spent on it. So the folks at the Rudd Center at Cornell, they proposed this marketing defense model, where they propose 4 conditions that are needed to protect or defend yourself against harmful food marketing messages. So they talk about awareness meaning you actually have to recognize this is an ad, understanding that this ad is trying to persuade, an ability to be able to come up with your own arguments, your own counter arguments in your own mind against this advertising. And number 4, one that we often miss, is actually motivation to resist. So we may actually all be very wise and very sophisticated in our understanding of advertising, but if it's been a long day, a stressful day, and we're walking home and we're smelling the waft of fast food going past, how great will our motivation be to resist this kind of advertising? So switching now into the regulation of advertising in Canada. Um, in Canada, we do have some overarching federal and provincial laws that do mention advertising, and they talk about prohibiting false, misleading, and deceptive representations, but there really isn't much or anything in any of these laws that look at children specifically, but certainly this does apply to children as well. Susie's going to talk about the Quebec experience as well. Quebec has had a ban on advertising targeted to children under 13 since 1989, and it did survive a Supreme Court challenge in 1989. Also, at the local level, I must mention that in Toronto we've done a lot in this area in terms of advocacy and policy development, and a lot of other health units, probably in this room as well, have passed positions that were called for various types of restrictions on advertising to children. And locally, our Public Library Board and Children's Services have adopted their own local policies that prohibit advertising to children in their facilities. And the TDSB is also reviewing their advertising policies. So in Canada, much like in many Western nations, the regulation of advertising to children is very much focused on industry self-regulation. So it's coordinated by Advertising Standards Canada, a nonprofit organization. And here are some examples of the various types of regulation that they have in place. Pre-clearance of food commercials. All TV ads to children must be pre-cleared by the Children's Clearance Committee. They also have the Canadian Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative I'm going to talk to about a bit. So there's various forms of industry self-regulation, and there's certain critique you could apply to this in terms of the fact that the self-regulatory system in place only applies to single ads, not about the advertising environment in general. So I'm going to look here now at the examples of industry efforts to change how they advertise to children these days. And most notably, that is the Canadian Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative. A lot of countries now have similar kind of initiatives by industry, the US and many other countries. So the initiative now includes 19 companies, and the initiative sets out ways that these organizations are going to change the way that they advertise food and beverages to children. So they have a variety of pledges. Here's some examples of what they do. Pledging not to use characters to sell food to children, not advertising in elementary schools. Some say they'll only advertise healthy dietary choices, and some say they won't advertise to children at all under the age of 12. Of course, if you look at the fine print, there are some issues here when it comes to the issue of using characters to sell food to children. They've actually exempted those characters that have been created by advertisers themselves to create food to children. So that's a bit of an ironic twist. They're not going to use characters to sell food, but they're exempting the ones they actually created for that specific purpose. Among those who said that they won't advertise to children at all, again, some issues here. So here's Jane's Family Foods, a Canadian company that said that they will not advertise to children under 12 at all, but you can still find in stores today their Jane's Kids frozen chicken nuggets with some Disney characters on the box. So that may be a surprise to people who hear that pledge and then see these characters on the box. Of course, the reason for this is that the definition of advertising used under the initiative says that packaging is not counted as advertising, so they can continue to use these characters on the box. And the big piece here is the advertising only healthy dietary choices. So the companies did look at existing scientific standards, both in Health Canada and abroad, to come up with their own definitions of what would be called a healthy dietary choice. But when you look at what actually does qualify as healthy dietary choices under the initiative and can continue to be advertised to children, you see you have all kinds of cereals such as Fruit Loops and Reese's Puffs cereals and Chocolate Lucky Charms. You also see these kind of ones, the low sugar Nesquik chocolate syrup, Fruit Loops straws. So again, these all count as healthy dietary choices under the initiative and can continue to be advertised to children. Of course, the question is, to what extent are all these various products objectively healthy? They may not look healthy to us. Health Canada does not yet have a definition of healthy and unhealthy foods. Other countries have attempted to do that. So we can look, for example, at the UK Food Standards Agency and the nutrient profiling model, which uses a point system based on calories, fat, salt, sugar, fruit and vegetable content, fiber, and protein to judge whether a food is so-called healthier or less healthy and whether it can actually be advertised to children under their children's junk food ad ban. So under the system, if a food scores 4 points or higher, it's considered less healthy. Under 4 points, it's healthier. So some examples of some common Canadian foods. So we have some steel-cut oats on the left, a -8, certainly on the healthier end. Apples, muesli cereal. And then on the right, we have some common foods, some poutine, KFC Double Down sandwich. And at the top, we have our lovely Wendy's Baconator Double, which has 2 patties, 2 slices of cheese, and 6 pieces of bacon, which will put you to sleep right now. Now, if you compare this to some of the foods in the initiative that are called healthier dietary choices, you'll find a lot of them do also end up on the right side as well. And again, this is all based on a 100-gram portion. So you could certainly argue that when you're eating a Baconator sandwich, you're going to be eating more and more calories than if you're having some cereal. But based on how this is calculated, a lot of these healthier dietary choice products end up being less healthy. Interestingly, McDonald's Happy Meal does end up being healthier. That's the one that they exclusively advertise, which is white meat chicken, low-fat milk, and apples, which I am told, by the way, by some people at McDonald's that this represents only a very small portion of the actual Happy Meals that are sold, but this is the only one that they advertise. So it is healthier under the system. And if you look objectively as well, Public Health Agency commissioned a report that did find that between 43 and 58% of these healthy dietary choices would not meet nutrition standards set up by other countries. And also, Monique Potvin-Kent did an analysis of children's advertising, and she found that, interestingly enough, the foods that were promoted by companies that were not part of the initiative were actually healthier than the ones that were promoted by those who were in the initiative. The U.S. Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative has announced that they're going to come up with some uniform nutrition standards, which may improve things. But the issue there is that they're still based on a labeled serving size. And we know there are issues when it comes to serving size as well. Here's an example of the General Mills Chocolate Lucky Charms cereal, where back in early 2008, when the Canadian initiative was going in the process of being implemented, you can see that the sugar content was 15 grams. According to the General Mills standards, it had to be under 12 grams for it to be qualified under the initiative and for them to continue to advertise it. And you'll see by the end of December, when the deadline was approaching, they did lower to 11 grams. And as you'll see, of course, that the serving size was reduced. So that's, again, one of the little flaws about healthy dietary choices, and the companies making up their own definitions. Just to wrap up here, I want to give a bit of a snapshot of the discussion about children's advertising, what's being said by various parties. I think we need to build on what's being said so we're not repeating things. So critics in Canada are saying things like the voluntary codes in children's advertising haven't worked and we need a ban. Others saying that the advertising self-regulatory code has proved ineffective and that's why we need more government intervention. We also hear industry voices saying that the broadcast code for advertising to children will be updated in the next few months to be able to address these concerns. We also hear that advertising to children is responsible for contributing to the nutritional intake of children, around breakfast especially. And others saying there's actually still no factual evidence that advertising is harmful to children's health or well-being. So you can see a bit of a landscape of various voices and the discussion that's going on here. The thing that I need to tell you about, though, is that all of these quotes are 40 years old. So these are from around 1973. So it gives you a bit of a sense that the conversations we're having today are not new. These conversations have been going on for a long, long time. This particular debate was centered around a private member's bill that was put forward by a Conservative member of Parliament back in 1971, James McGrath, that was calling on the government to prohibit all TV advertising to children. And even back then, you had all of these same discussions going on that we're still having today. So, some concluding thoughts. At its core, I think we need to realize that advertising to children is really about advertising to current and future adults. Advertising to future adults in the sense that they're trying to build brand loyalty so they have these customers throughout a lifetime, and advertising to current adults as well in terms of the kidfluence and trying to use children as a way to tap into the wallets of parents. As I've just mentioned, the debates around the concern about advertising to children are not new. They've been going on for decades at various points, and we really need to acknowledge those discussions that have already happened, so that we're not just repeating it, but we're building on those debates. And also, we really need to have some meaningful public debate around the issue, and I'm hoping this event today can really contribute to that in terms of helping to draw the line between myth and fact. As Ken Wong, who will be here later today, talks about, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but there really is only one set of facts. And I think we really need to be clear on what the facts are around this situation. And finally, just to wrap up, whatever course of action we take, I think we need to be mindful, especially in public health, that the absence of any perfect solutions is not an excuse for us to do nothing. I'll stop there. Thank you.